Remove the 30mm 12-point nuts holding on the axles to the wheel hubs. Remove the M10 or M12 triple square bolts holding the axles to the transmission. There are 6 on each side. You can rotate the wheel to gain access to each bolts. Remove the 16mm bolts that hold the sway bar to the front of the A-arms. This will let you move the sway bar out of the way when you will take out the axles. Push the axle out of the hub, then turn the wheel one way or the other to remove both axles. On an automatic transmission, you will need to remove the plastic cover that blocks the torque converter fixation nuts. Rotate the engine from the crankshaft to remove the 3 15mm nuts from the torque converter. You can now remove the battery cover. And remove the 13mm bolt holding the battery bracket in front of the battery. After this, you can remove both the positive and negative posts on the battery and remove the battery from the car. You can then remove the 4 10mm bolts holding the battery tray to the frame of the car. You can now use pliers to remove the clamp holding the intake tube to the airbox and remove the intake tube. Once this is done, you can now disconnect the MAP sensor. You can now remove the airbox once you've unbolted the 2 10mm bolts, one on the front and one on the rear. If you have an automatic transmission, you will need to disconnect both coolant lines that go to the transcooler shown here. Remove all wiring harnesses that plug to the transmission and then remove the shift linkage. The one shown on the video is a manual shift linkage. If you have an automatic transmission, you will also have a shift linkage. You can now remove the starter, so you'll have one bolt on the bottom of the starter. You'll have a first nut holding a bracket for the power steering line, and then another bolt underneath it holding the starter to the engine. You have also a second bolt that is hidden right here between the cooler and the starter. Now you can support the engine and then remove the 2 18mm bolts holding the support to the transmission. If you see the engine and transmission lower, like it's shown in the video, you will need to lift the engine with your engine support so it comes back to horizontal before removing the bolts. Now go underneath the car and remove the two 13mm bolts holding the dog bone mount to the subframe. Be very careful with these bolts because they often break, so I would recommend heating them and applying some lubricant before trying to remove them. You can now remove the two 16mm bolts that go into the transmission. Now you can place a support underneath the transmission or from the top of the transmission and start removing the main bolts between the engine and the transmission. You have 4 bolts on the bottom shown right now, and you'll have 2 bolts on the top of the transmission. Once these bolts are removed, you can slide the transmission off the engine.